It is officially finale week for The Amazing Race season 37, but before we get there, we have to get you caught up, so let's get into episode 10. Okay, so at the beginning of this episode, the teams are instructed to fly to Germany and then take a train to Strasbourg, France, which I loved this episode overall, and here's why. I finally felt, we have been saying a lot this season that it feels like there's a lot of like clues and very almost like hurry up and wait type feel to the season. But this episode specifically, I just think had a lot of meat to it and also had a lot of really good challenges. And also, it was very unclear up until a certain point in the episode of who was going to get first, and also I honestly had no idea who was going to be eliminated up until when the team was eliminated.
It was a good episode.
So I liked the way this worked. So upon arrival, all teams are instructed to drive to the Palace of Europe to correctly name the 4 countries that they have been to on the race so far that are members of the Council of Europe. And what made me laugh so hard was most of the teams got it really quickly, but the teams that didn't, they just like started naming off random things. Like, I think it was Brett and Mark that were like, Dubai. And I was like, why would Dubai be a part of the Council of Europe?
Well, in my thought too, that from being a viewer, personally, yes, they flew to Germany just to take the train, but in my opinion, you didn't race through Germany.
Yes.
You know, which was one of the 4. It was France, Germany, Italy, and
Bulgaria.
And
I think that's what threw a lot of teams, because part of the clue was like, you actively raced in these places or something. And everyone was like, well, does Germany really count? Like, we just took a flight. Like, does that really mean anything? So that would be kind of tricky. But anyway, so that's the first part of this. And then here's what was interesting. They had this roadblock water joust competition, if you will. And I've not really seen anything like this on the race in a long time, but they essentially call it a head-to-head roadblock. So one member of each team must knock another team, like one person from them, another cast member, if you will, off a boat into the river in this water joust duel. So basically, like, let's say Charlie and I are on opposing teams, right? If I knock Charlie off, I move on and Charlie now has to compete again, and you keep going until you knock someone off. And then if you're the last place team, there's no one else to try and get off, so you face a 10-minute penalty. This was so funny because I felt like it was like, I'm so sorry to take this there. It was like the epitome of like toxic masculinity because you had like, was it Carson and Jack that got it? No, who got first in this?
First was...
It was Han and Holden. Yes,
Yeah.
And so then you switched to like all the men of the rest of the pairs, and they were all like upset that they didn't get it on their first try, the ones that would lose, and then they'd get it the very next time. And I'm like, you are so silly for that. Like, the fact that you're that upset because you didn't knock him off, like, let's be honest, the time didn't really matter on this because all the teams end up catching up together at the next part of this episode. So I was like, the fact that you got that upset over it was just like very funny.
Well, let's just bring it up. The worst one was Jonathan. Soured his mood instantly for the rest of the day.
But he had no one to blame but himself on that part.
I'm sure he blamed Anna.
Well,
somehow,
probably. Brett and Mark did end up getting last in this part of the episode, though, so they did face the 10-minute penalty, unfortunately. So the next part of this episode, we move in kind of this cheese memory game, which this was kind of interesting. So they go to this local cheese shop, and this very French kind of chef, if you will, is naming off these 9 different types of cheeses, and you can kind of taste test them and look at them, and then you have to go outside, and essentially they lift up you know, trays, and you have to be able to identify all 9 cheeses. And when you go outside, you can also taste it or, you know, smell it or just look at it or whatever, but you and your team have to correctly identify them. The tricky thing about this is 9 is kind of a lot if you're not familiar with cheese. And secondly, you had to say the French word for all of them, which would also be challenging.
Munster. That was the only cheese I knew.
I know any of them. I was like, what are these? I was so taken back. I was like, huh? And honestly, here's why I love The Amazing Race, because it's a random game like this that, like, no team really had the upper hand. All teams got caught up to each other. Literally every team got there. Even Brett and Mark caught up. Like, it did not matter. One thing I did find fascinating, though, is as we know from a few legs ago, Alyssa and Josiah got the express pass. And Alyssa was like, listen, everyone's here, everyone's stuck. We're not gonna know these French names of these cheeses. We might as well just use the express pass and we have a better shot at getting first. And this is the one time that I just like have not agreed with Josiah this entire game, because Josiah's like, no, Alyssa, I really, like, he was nice about it still, of course, but he was like, I really think we can do it. Like, let's just try. So they try, they fail. They try again, they fail. They try again, they fail.
What's funny is he was like, one more time.
One
more time. One more. It's like, at a certain point, you have to cut yourself off.
And then they end up being the second to last place team on this part of the challenge. And so I'm like, so they end up using their express pass, but I'm like, it was stupid because if they'd used it 30 minutes prior, it might have like helped them further along in the episode too.
Exactly.
So I didn't really understand the logic behind that, like by finally using it. I'm like, at that point, you probably could have named it, and I don't know that it really would have affected you.
Right. Yeah. And at this part too is also when Jonathan called. Jonathan and Anna finally got through it.
Yeah.
After I don't even know how many attempts, but in the long run, after they finished, he's like, "This is all your fault.
Yep.
You're a terrible partner."
Yeah. Because he says her cheese is the reason they couldn't get past all the other times.
It's like, you need to divorce him ASAP as soon as this race is over.
Yeah. It's honestly just weird. And the thing that I did appreciate this time, though, that I don't feel like we've seen in every other episode where they fight, is that Anna, like, really sticks up for herself, I feel like, and is very, like, leave me alone. Like, I'm doing the best I can.
Yeah, she cops a with him the rest of the episode.
Yeah. Well, because then, so they head off for the detour, but the thing about the detour this episode is either challenge you chose, there was, like, kind of complicated directions to get where, like, no one could just figure out on their own. So everyone stopped to ask locals, and Jonathan just kept being in her ear, like, you're taking too long, you're wasting time. I'm like, she is trying to get thorough directions for you to get to where you need to go accurately.
Well, and she laid out these detailed instructions, and then as they're driving, he's like, okay, pull over, let me do it. She's like, you do what? You're not giving me directions. I can't do.
She was reading her directions and attempting to drive at the same time. I'm like, he was no help. It was very, very frustrating. We could rant about this team all day long, though. So for the detour, we have out to dry or for the birds. So for out to dry, the teams are tasked with washing a load of dirty laundry in the river, which is just more of kind of like an old school but traditional thing they would do in this town of France. So literally they take it and they're like scrubbing it and then rinsing it in the river. And the whole thing was basically there was a judge who like she deemed if she felt like it was clean enough and the stains were out. The other side of this was called For the Birds. So just 2 teams did this one, but the teams had to construct a stork nest. And let me tell you, at face value, this didn't seem that complicated. And then so it was Alyssa, Josiah, and Brett and Mark were the 2 teams that chose to do this one. They both kept getting denied from the judge. And it was because it was so fine-tuned in the details, this part of the challenge.
Yeah,
and I cannot imagine.
The first time they didn't realize the board had to go with it.
Yep.
Then they, Josiah and Alyssa totally blanked. I forgot to put the little carpet thing in there, and then they all didn't realize that they had to tuck the wires underneath the board.
Yeah.
So very like nitpicky, detail-oriented.
Very detailed.
And I think it was even Brett and Mark were like, everything's green. It all blends together.
Yeah.
Which, it would have been hard to see.
Yeah. One thing that I really found interesting too as a viewer of this episode is that and we kind of touched on this at the beginning, but this truly was like a very tight episode the whole way through, to the point where like every team the whole time thought they were in last, which I thought was kind of funny. Carson and Jack eventually get past the washing detour and get out of there, and they end up getting first and kind of get away from everyone else. But beyond that, it really was a tight finish. Alyssa and Josiah end up getting the stork thing done. They have to ask for directions from a local. So they get to the pit stop, they get second. But then here's where it gets really interesting. So you got Brett and Mark, Han and Holden, and Jonathan and Anna. And truly in the editing, I'm like, I have no idea what's about to happen. This is so complex. So Jonathan and Anna arrive, and I'm like, I roll. And then I'm like, okay, so now we're down to Han and Holden and Brett and Mark. And I really, really thought Han and Holden were going to go because obviously they were kind of last minute saved on the last time because it ended up being a non-elimination leg for the first time in years. But to my surprise, Han and Holden come running around the corner and get 4th place, and it's Brett and Mark who are actually eliminated this time around. And I was pretty sad about that.
Well, I didn't think about it until just now. Here's what probably hurt them. After the stork nest, they were going to get directions from the local, but then they said, no, let's just follow Josiah and Alyssa.
Yeah.
And then they lost them.
Yeah.
And then that put them behind. If they would have just gotten directions from the local at that same point in time, they probably would have gotten there sooner.
Yeah. So it's interesting because, so I did chat with them this week, and I actually asked them that, and they said they didn't feel like that's what did it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think it was just like, they said they felt like this whole leg was just like not for them, like they were doomed from the start, because they were kind of behind for a lot of it, and then kind of caught up with everyone else, and anyway.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. It's just a complicated episode, because obviously as a viewer, you don't see where everyone is, like, because they're coming from different parts of the detour. So you don't know where they're at in conjunction with like distance to the pit stop. The only thing we knew is that they really were very close behind Han and Holden. And Han and Holden were very close behind Jonathan and Anna.
They need to start adding the like arrival times to the pit,
I know,
like they do at the beginning of the episode.
I know, because I'd also love to know like how much further ahead Carson and Jack got there compared to like Brett and Mark. You know, I think that would be fascinating. Well, Like I said, we haven't seen this done before, at least not since the show came back from COVID. But we're having a 2-night finale. So night 1 will be Wednesday on CBS, of course, and we'll have the final 4 racing through Portugal, a town of Portugal, which I think will be fun. And then Thursday night will be the actual finale where we're going to find out the winner, and the final 3 will be racing back to the States because, of course, it always ends back here in the U.S., and they are competing in Miami, which will be kind of fun. I feel like it's been like a very water-based season, I feel like. It has. And I'm sure that will continue, given that Miami's very
I wouldn't get in the water inland in Miami, personally, with the alligators, but...
Well, you never know. So anyway, that is it for this time around on The Amazing Race. And as always, Amazing Race airs Wednesdays on CBS and Thursday this week, so don't miss it.